my interest began in the garden. My interest began when I started to put my hands in the soil and on the plants. And anyone growing a little bit of food, which has always been a passion of mine. I had my first garden when I was 8 years old, although I called it a farm. And whenever I could grow 3 or 4 strawberries, I would put them in a cup and sell them to my mother. So it was a farm. And then I took up farming again when my wife Judith and I moved to the country, when we bought a house in the country in New England in 1983. The first thing I wanted to do was to plant a garden and see if I could grow some food. And that engagement became an engagement with the natural world. It wasn't always happy. There were weeds, there were pests, there were rodents. I got into a war with a woodchuck, a very large rodent, and found myself confronted with the fundamental human dilemmas of how do we get what we need from nature when nature has its own interests, and nature sometimes works against our interests, and then how do we harmonize our interests and needs, our desires, with nature's ways, and learning about that. And that journey led to my first book, which Andrea did not discuss, called Second Nature, which is not a book about food, it's a book about the garden. But all that the garden, and by extension the farm, has to teach us about the human relationship to the natural world. Why do you use this chemical, this neurotoxin called monitor? And he said, because it's the best way to control net necrosis. What is net necrosis? Net necrosis is a disease of potatoes spread by aphids that leaves, if you've ever sliced open a potato and you see a little brown line or a brown spot. And I said, what's so bad about net necrosis? And he said, nothing, it's a purely cosmetic defect. So why do you spray? Because McDonald's, which buys 7% of the potato crop in America, will not accept any potatoes with net necrosis. And I said, is there any other way to control net necrosis? And he said, oh yes, just don't plant russet Burbank potatoes. It's really a problem with russet Burbank potatoes. This is a variety of potatoes, these very long russeted potatoes that have been very popular in America since the 1880s, developed by Luther Burbank. And I said, so why don't you grow another kind of potato? And he said, because McDonald's will only buy russet Burbank potatoes. And I said, you see, we both talked a lot about potatoes. And I said, why is that? And he says, because McDonald's likes its French fries to be as long as possible. And you know, we've all seen the red box with the bouquet of long French fries. And so there it is. There was the whole food system. And that's when it occurred to me that a very simple question, where does our food come from, needed to be answered for our generation. It's a dumb question in many ways. For most of history, you could not write a book about where your food comes from because everybody knew. Everybody either was a farmer or involved in food production or knew farmers. But we now live in a world, more so in America than here, I think, but still here as well, where the question where our food comes from is urgent, and we need to answer it, and people are very curious. The most encouraging thing that has happened in the last 10 years in America, I think, is that the question at the heart of that book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, has moved to the center of our culture. And there are millions of people very interested in this question of where their food comes from. And this is terrifying to the food industry, as you can imagine. Now, it took me a while to realize, though, that you can demonize this industry and say, look what they're doing. But why are they doing it? They're doing it because we like long French fries. We are co-producers of that system. Our tastes, our taste for predictability, our desire to walk into a McDonald's anywhere in the world and get the same long French fry and the same burger is what has driven those changes in the food system. The food movement, which is rising in America, rising all over the world, a movement for good, clean, and fair food, is a movement with so much hope, with such empowerment, because unlike so many of the other equally important issues we're struggling with, crisis of the environment, climate change, social justice, a movement that can point to such progress in everyday life, where people can vote 3 times a day to create the food system they want to see, to create the world they want to see. It's no wonder that for your generation, this is a defining issue. Because in a landscape where hope is very rare and very hard to find, this movement, which of course connects to all the others, offers so much hope and so much possibility for action today. What I tell my students, and most of my students are journalists, is that they should try a variety of different things. You're not going to find the one job or the one path right away, in all likelihood. I mean, I have been on 3 or 4 very different paths in my life. And, you know, when you see people up here, you think, you know, we were born this way. But actually, we looked very different, we thought very differently, and we didn't know what we were doing, which is an argument for experimenting. You need to find, there's so many different ways to contribute to this movement. And I will call it a movement. It's also an economy, an alternative economy. But in the end, it's about connecting your passion and your skills with the needs that are out there. So for some of us, and this has been true for me, the storytelling has been very important. I'm not a great cook. I'm not a great gardener. I learned by doing those things. They made big contributions. But it was when I discovered that my contribution was with the pen and the computer that I realized I was home. So you have to try a few different things, whether it's internships or jobs, until something feels right. And that's a matter not only of aligning your gifts with the needs, but also of finding the people that you like. One of the reasons I became a writer is I liked other writers, and I liked spending time with them. So you're looking for a culture as well as a calling. And I wish you good luck.